Sometimes, the most powerful stories don't begin with a scream. They begin with a whisper. Imagine standing in line at a grocery store, the buzz of people, the hum of the cash registers, the shuffle of carts. Then, you hear a soft, trembling voice. A little black girl, maybe no more than 10 years old, clutching a loaf of bread to her chest. She doesn't ask for toys. She doesn't ask for candy. She looks up with wide, tired eyes and whispers to the cashier, "I don't want money. I just want food for my grandma." And in that moment, the entire room goes silent. This is the story of what happened next. A story of hunger, pride, kindness, and a community that almost forgot how powerful compassion could be, until one little girl reminded them. Before we dive in, don't forget to support the channel by liking this video, subscribing, and turning on the notification bell, because stories like this deserve to be heard. The fluorescent lights of Miller's grocery flickered slightly as evening settled outside. The air smelled faintly of oranges and bread. Most customers rushed in and out, thinking about dinners, errands, and weekend plans. No one paid attention to the thin little girl standing at the far end of the checkout lane. Her dress was clean but faded, her shoes scuffed from long walks. She stood so still, holding a small basket with just 2 items, a loaf of bread and a carton of milk. Her hands trembled, not from cold, but from something deeper, hesitation. When it was her turn, she lifted her basket onto the counter. The cashier, a young man in his 20s, scanned the bread, then the milk. He looked at her, expecting money. But instead, she leaned forward slightly and whispered, so softly it almost got lost in the clatter of the store, "I don't want money. I just want food for my grandma." The cashier froze, unsure if he had heard correctly. A woman in line behind her raised an eyebrow. Someone else pulled out their phone, sensing something unusual was unfolding. The little girl lowered her eyes, ashamed, but she didn't run. Her grandmother hadn't eaten in 2 days. She couldn't go home empty-handed again. The silence grew heavy. Finally, a man further down the line stepped forward. He was in his 40s, wearing a work jacket, hands rough from long hours of labor. He cleared his throat. "How old are you, sweetheart?" he asked gently. The girl looked up, eyes glistening. 10. "And where's your grandma?" "At home. She's sick," she whispered. "I just need bread and milk for her." Gasps rippled through the line. The cashier shifted awkwardly. For the first time in a long while, strangers stopped thinking about themselves and started thinking about someone else. But this was only the beginning. No one in that grocery store could have predicted how far this single moment would ripple, how it would change not just one girl's life, but an entire community. Her name was Amara. 10 years old, with braids her grandmother carefully plaited each morning, even when her fingers ached from arthritis. Amara's life had never been easy, but she didn't realize just how different it was from most children's lives, at least not until moments like the one in the grocery store forced the truth into the open. Amara lived with her grandmother, Miss Thelma, in a small, weathered house at the end of a quiet street. Paint peeled from the wooden boards, and the roof leaked when it rained too hard. Inside, the furniture was mismatched, second-hand, and worn, but clean, because Thelma insisted on keeping dignity, no matter how little they had. Thelma had been Amara's guardian since she was just a toddler. Her parents were gone, her father long disappeared, her mother taken too soon by illness. Thelma, already in her late 60s at the time, didn't hesitate. She gathered Amara into her arms and promised, "I'll take care of you, baby. Always." But promises are heavy when life keeps throwing storms. Thelma's health had declined sharply in recent years. Diabetes, high blood pressure, and arthritis left her unable to work. Her hands, once strong from years of cooking in the local school cafeteria, now trembled as she tried to grip a spoon. She relied on government checks, but they barely covered rent, electricity, and her medications. That left food, something so simple, so basic, often out of reach. Amara tried to help in the ways a child could. She would sweep the floors, wash dishes, and sometimes sneak into neighbors' yards to gather fallen fruit from trees. She learned to make a pot of rice last for 3 days, stretching it with whatever scraps she could find. But in the last week, even rice had run out. She had gone to bed listening to her grandmother's stomach growl softly in the dark, and she felt a hollow ache in her own. Still, when Thelma asked if she had eaten, Amara always said yes. She wanted her grandmother to believe she was full. On the day of the grocery store incident, Thelma had looked at her with weary eyes. "Baby, don't worry about me," she whispered, her voice dry. "I'll be all right. You just eat what you can." But Amara couldn't bear it. She put on her worn shoes, picked up the few coins she had saved from finding loose change on sidewalks, and walked nearly 2 miles to Miller's grocery. The coins weren't enough. She knew that. But she hoped, she prayed, that maybe someone would understand. That maybe kindness still existed in the world. So when the cashier asked for payment, and her voice cracked as she said, "I don't want money. I just want food for my grandma," it wasn't just a request. It was the last hope of a child shouldering the weight of 2 lives. And it was a hope about to collide with the conscience of everyone in that store. The store was frozen in that fragile moment, Amara standing small and trembling at the counter, the cashier staring blankly, and the line of customers caught between discomfort and compassion. The man in the work jacket, whose name was Mr. Daniels, shifted uneasily. He was a construction foreman, the kind of man whose hands were permanently rough from years of carrying steel beams and swinging hammers. He was used to solving problems, building bridges, repairing roads, but this was different. Inside, he felt a storm brewing. He'd seen poverty before. He'd grown up poor himself, with a mother who sometimes skipped meals so her children wouldn't have to. He remembered what it was like to eat ketchup sandwiches and pretend it was enough. And now, looking at Amara, skinny arms, downcast eyes, clutching that bread like it was gold, he felt that old ache rise again. But another voice whispered in his head, "Don't get involved. Keep moving. This isn't your business." He glanced around. The woman behind Amara was rolling her eyes, clearly impatient. A teenage boy in line was filming on his phone, already posting to social media. And the cashier, shifting uncomfortably, muttered, "Look, kid, if you don't have money, you can't just—" "Stop," Mr. Daniels interrupted, stepping forward. His voice was calm but firm. He placed a large, calloused hand on the counter. "I'll cover it." Amara's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to protest, but no words came. The cashier looked relieved, quickly punching in the items. But Mr. Daniels didn't move away. He studied Amara for a long moment. Something in her eyes told him this wasn't just about 1 loaf of bread and a carton of milk. "Sweetheart," he said softly, lowering his voice so others wouldn't hear, "is your grandma waiting at home for this?" Amara nodded quickly, clutching the bag as the cashier slid it toward her. Mr. Daniels sighed. He had groceries of his own to pay for, bills piling up, and a long shift waiting for him in the morning. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't a one-time need. "Come on," he said finally, surprising even himself. "Let's get you some more food. Bread and milk won't last long." Amara froze, unsure if this was a trick. For a moment, she looked ready to bolt. But there was something steady, almost fatherly, in Mr. Daniels' voice that made her pause. "Don't worry," he added gently. "I'm not here to hurt you. I think your grandma could use more than this." The other customers were watching now, some with curiosity, others with quiet shame. No one else stepped forward. Amara hesitated, then whispered, She hasn't eaten in 2 days." Those words hit Mr. Daniels like a hammer to the chest. 2 days. He clenched his jaw and nodded. "All right then," he said, gesturing toward the aisles. "Let's fix that." As he guided her back into the store, a strange mix of emotions filled him: compassion, anger at the world, and a deep sense of responsibility he hadn't expected when he walked in to buy groceries that evening. This was no longer just about a little girl and a loaf of bread. It was about dignity, survival, and a question that burned in his mind. How many more kids like her are out there, whispering for help while the world looks away? With the groceries bagged and paid for, Mr. Daniels carried most of them himself. He noticed how Amara clutched her smaller bag tightly against her chest, as if afraid someone might snatch it away. Outside, the evening air was cool, the streetlights flickering on. Mr. Daniels asked, "Where do you live, sweetheart?" Amara pointed down the road, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not far. I can walk." He nodded. "Then I'll walk with you. Groceries are heavy." She wanted to argue, wanted to say she didn't want to bother him, but something in his steady tone made her nod instead. They walked in silence at first, the sound of gravel crunching beneath their shoes. Amara's steps were quick, practiced. She knew this route well. It wasn't long before the nice storefronts gave way to cracked sidewalks, overgrown yards, and houses that sagged under the weight of time. Finally, she stopped in front of a small, weathered home. The paint was peeling, one shutter hung crooked, and the porch creaked when Mr. Daniels stepped onto it. There was no car in the driveway, no signs of a well-kept lawn, just the faint glow of a light inside. Amara pushed open the door. "Grandma, I'm back." The smell hit him first, musty, faintly medicinal, and thin, like air that hadn't been filled with the scent of a real meal in a long time. Inside, the living room was tidy but bare. The couch sagged in the middle, a stack of neatly folded blankets sat on a chair, and a small heater hummed in the corner. On the wall, faded photographs told a story of better days, smiling faces, family reunions, birthdays. And then, in a worn recliner by the window, sat Miss Thelma. Her skin was pale, her cheeks sunken. She wore a faded house dress and a knitted shawl that looked handmade, perhaps from years ago. Her hands, thin and trembling, rested on her lap. Still, when she saw Amara step in, her eyes lit up. "Baby," she whispered, her voice hoarse but warm. "You're back." Amara hurried over, placing the bread and milk in her grandmother's lap like they were treasures. "I got food, Grandma. You can eat now." Miss Thelma's lips quivered. She cupped Amara's face in her trembling hands. "Lord have mercy. What did you do, child?" "She didn't do anything wrong," Mr. Daniels said gently, stepping forward. "She just asked for help." Thelma looked up, startled. For a moment, fear flashed in her eyes. Fear of judgment, of pity, of losing the little pride she had left. I didn't mean for anyone to," she began, but Mr. Daniels shook his head. "Ma'am, you don't need to explain. Everyone needs help sometimes." Her eyes softened, though tears threatened. She tried to straighten her back, to hold on to dignity. "We get by," she said quietly. "We always do." But as Mr. Daniels glanced around, at the empty cupboards visible from the kitchen doorway, at the single pot sitting on the stove, at the thin blankets stacked neatly as if they'd been layered for warmth, he realized getting by was a fragile thread stretched far too thin. Amara busied herself unpacking the groceries, placing cans and boxes neatly in the kitchen. She worked quickly, like she had done it 100 times before, her small hands moving with quiet efficiency. Mr. Daniels swallowed hard. He had thought buying a few bags of groceries would solve the problem, at least for now. But looking around this house, he understood this wasn't just a bad week. This was their life. And for the first time, He felt the weight of a decision pressing down on him. Would he walk away now, telling himself he had done enough? Thelma sighed, her voice soft and cracked. It's not the food, baby. It's that I should be the one giving to you, not taking from others. A woman has to hold on to her pride. Amara tilted her head, her innocence piercing. But isn't it okay to share? You always told me sharing is good. Tears filled Thelma's eyes. Out of the mouths of babes, truth often comes. She reached for Amara's hand. Yes, baby. Sharing is good. I just wish I could be the one giving, not receiving. That night, as Amara slept peacefully, Thelma lay awake, wrestling with her pride. She knew she needed help. She knew her granddaughter deserved better than getting by. But her heart ached with the weight of feeling less than she once was. And just when she thought she might be adjusting to the community's kindness, life dealt her a blow that stripped away the last defenses she had left. Because soon, her health would take a turn. And no amount of pride could hide it anymore. It started with a cough. At first, just a dry tickle that Miss Thelma waved off as nothing but dust. But over the days, the cough deepened. Her breaths grew shorter, her energy weaker. Amara noticed first. She would hear her grandmother wheezing softly at night, even when the room was silent. She watched as Thelma's hands trembled more when trying to hold a spoon. She saw the way her grandmother forced a smile, trying to convince her everything was fine. But children know when something is wrong. One morning, as the sun slipped through the thin curtains, Amara woke to find Thelma still in her chair, not moving. Her skin was pale, her lips dry. "Grandma," Amara whispered, shaking her gently. Thelma stirred, her eyes fluttering open. "I'm all right, baby," she rasped. "Just tired." But Amara wasn't convinced. Terrified, she grabbed the old flip phone neighbors had given them and dialed the only number she could think of, Mr. Daniels. He arrived within minutes, his work jacket thrown on over a t-shirt, his face tight with worry. One look at Thelma told him this was beyond exhaustion. "She needs a doctor," he said firmly. Thelma tried to protest, her voice weak but insistent. "No hospitals. Too expensive. We'll be fine." Mr. Daniels crouched beside her chair, his voice low and steady. "Ma'am, with respect, you're not fine. And Amara needs you." The mention of Amara made her falter. She glanced at the little girl, who stood clutching the arm of the chair, tears streaming down her face. "Grandma, please," Amara begged, her voice breaking. "Please go. I don't want to lose you." Thelma's pride cracked. The fight drained out of her. With trembling hands, she nodded slowly. Mr. Daniels didn't waste another second. He scooped her into his strong arms, light as a feather, far too light for a woman her age, and carried her to his truck. Amara climbed in beside him, holding her grandmother's shawl like it was a lifeline. At the hospital, doctors moved quickly. They discovered Thelma's diabetes had spiraled out of control. Her blood pressure was dangerously high, and her lungs showed signs of pneumonia. The combination was life-threatening. As Thelma was wheeled away for treatment, Amara clung to Mr. Daniels' hand. Her small fingers trembled in his rough palm. "Is she gonna be okay?" she whispered. He squeezed her hand gently. "She's tough. Tougher than most. But she needs care, Amara. Real care." Hours passed. Finally, a doctor came out with cautious but hopeful news. Thelma was stable, but she would need ongoing treatment and proper nutrition to recover. For Amara, the relief was overwhelming. She buried her face in Mr. Daniels' side, sobbing quietly. He wrapped an arm around her, his own eyes wet. In that moment, he realized something. This little girl and her grandmother weren't just a passing story. They had become part of his life. And he couldn't walk away. Not now, not ever. But outside the hospital doors, the story was already growing. Reporters had caught wind of the viral video. Strangers from across the city were asking questions. Amara's whisper had sparked compassion in a grocery store. But now, it was about to reach far beyond the walls of her grandmother's fragile home. By the time Miss Thelma was resting in her hospital bed, hooked up to monitors and breathing easier, the world outside had already begun to move. The video of Amara at Miller's grocery had gone viral. What had started as a shaky clip from a teenager's phone was now flooding news feeds, shared across states and even countries. The caption read, "This little girl didn't ask for money. She just wanted food for her grandma." Comments poured in by the thousands. Some wrote, "This broke me. I can't stop crying." Others, "Where is this family? How can I help?" News outlets picked up the story. Headlines flashed across TV screens and online articles. Right arrow, 10-year-old's whisper moves the internet to tears. Right arrow, a child's plea for food sparks wave of compassion. Soon, the hospital where Miss Thelma was being treated received calls from people wanting to cover her medical expenses. A local charity offered to pay for her prescriptions. Churches organized food drives. Strangers sent care packages filled with clothes, toys for Amara, and handmade quilts. But perhaps the most powerful change happened closer to home. At Miller's grocery, the store owner set up a donation box at the register labeled, "For families in need, because no child should beg for bread." Customers who had once rushed through without a second thought began slipping in a few dollars, cans, and even gift cards. Mr. Daniels watched it all unfold with a mix of awe and caution. He was grateful, deeply grateful, that the world had rallied. But he also knew how quickly the world could move on once the headlines faded. He worried about Amara and Thelma when the spotlight dimmed. At the hospital, Amara stayed close to her grandmother's side, holding her hand through the nights. She didn't understand the full scope of what was happening online, but she saw the steady stream of visitors, the flowers, the food deliveries, and the kindness etched into every smile. "Grandma," she whispered one night, her small hand tucked into Thelma's fragile palm, "why are all these people helping us?" Thelma's eyes filled with tears. "Because you reminded them, baby. You reminded the world that love still matters." But the chain reaction wasn't just about food and money. Something deeper was happening. Teachers who saw the story began noticing the quiet kids in their classrooms, the ones who always said they weren't hungry, even when their stomachs growled. Neighbors started checking in on elderly residents who lived alone. Parents began teaching their children about empathy, about listening for the whispers of those who suffer silently. Amara's voice, once trembling and nearly lost in the noise of a grocery store, had become an echo carried across countless hearts. And yet, as Thelma's health slowly improved, another question lingered. What would happen when the cameras left, when the donations slowed, when life returned to normal? For Thelma and Amara, survival wasn't just about one meal or one hospital stay. It was about finding a way forward with dignity, together. And that path was only beginning to take shape. Weeks passed, and Miss Thelma grew stronger with each day. The color slowly returned to her cheeks, her laugh, soft but warm, began to echo again in hospital corridors, and Amara, once shadowed by worry, began smiling with the innocence of a child once more. When Thelma was finally discharged, she returned not to an empty, struggling home but to a community that had rallied around her. Neighbors stocked her pantry with food. Local carpenters repaired the cracks in her walls. A church group even set up a fund to ensure her utilities would never again be cut off. Amara, clutching her grandmother's hand as they walked back into their small but freshly painted house, looked around with wide eyes. It didn't feel like the same home anymore. It felt alive, filled with hope. But the biggest change was in Amara herself. She had once whispered in desperation, but now, when she spoke, she carried the confidence of someone who had seen her words move mountains. One afternoon, a local reporter asked to interview her again. Sitting on the porch beside Thelma, Amara was asked, "Amara, when you whispered in that store, did you ever imagine this would happen?" Amara shook her head shyly. "No, ma'am. I just wanted food for my grandma. I didn't care about anything else." The reporter pressed, "And now that you've seen what your words have done, what do you want to tell the world?" Amara paused, her small face thoughtful. Then she said something that silenced everyone around her. "I learned that people don't always need money first. They need kindness. Money can buy food, but kindness makes sure nobody has to eat alone. What really matters is that we take care of each other." The words traveled farther than any viral video ever could. Schools played the clip in classrooms. Churches shared it in sermons. Parents repeated it at dinner tables. And slowly, quietly, it became a message that reshaped how people thought about giving. Miss Thelma listened, tears glistening in her eyes, as she pulled Amara close. "Baby girl," she whispered, "you've done more in your 10 years than some do in a lifetime." Life didn't become perfect after that. There were still bills to pay, still challenges to face. But there was never again a moment when Thelma and Amara felt invisible. They had become a symbol of what love, resilience, and compassion could spark in a divided world. And for Amara, what mattered most was simple. Her grandma was safe. Her grandma was fed. Her grandma was still here. The story began with a whisper in a grocery store. It ended with a roar of humanity, reminding the world what really matters.